Hello and welcome to day one of Cultivate by Collaborative Solutions. And thank you for joining our conversation today around strategies for integrating systems in mergers and acquisitions. We're excited to spend the next hour with you. We know you could be anywhere else in the world right now, and we are grateful that you chose to spend your time with us. My name is Danielle White. I'm the VP of Global Customer Engagement at Collaborative Solutions. I also have Mary Ellen Kennemer, who will be helping me moderate today, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi there. Good morning or good day, whatever time zone you're joining us from. My name is Mary Ellen Kennemer. I have been with Collaborative for the last 9 years of my 11 years in the Workday ecosystem. I'm a senior director on our advisory team, focusing on supporting our in-production customers who are going through major transformational efforts such as M&As. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks. We have an insightful conversation for you today about M&A, and I will say that looking at the Menti results, obviously a lot of you joining us today have recently acquired someone or have been acquired yourself, which is really following true with what we've seen over the last year and a half. I think most of us would have said at the beginning of the pandemic that we would have expected for a lot of business activities like this to have slowed down. And what we saw was actually exactly the opposite. We saw a lot of activity actually speed up. In fact, Collaborative was one of those organizations was actually involved in an acquisition last year. So I'm really excited about the incredible lineup of business leaders we have with us today who have navigated their way through M&A and are here to share their story. But before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be shared with you via email at the end of the event. And for our viewers, you are on mute. So if you have any questions throughout the conversation for the panelists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also access the chat at the bottom of the screen if you would like to communicate with anybody else during the session. But without further ado, please help me welcome our panelists for our conversation today. First, I'd like to welcome Catherine Diaz, SVP of Total Rewards at Cognizant. Kathy?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Very excited to talk to you today about our M&A story at Cognizant. I lead our Global Total Rewards as well as HR M&A group, and had the pleasure of working with Danielle and others on a recent acquisition of Collaborative Solutions.
Thanks. Next, we're going to welcome Paul Nelson, an HR systems manager in the insurance industry. Paul?
Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. I've been in the Workday ecosystem myself for 6 years, leading our HR systems team. We have a team of 13 people that provides all of the Workday support across our 6 operating companies that make up our enterprise. So we've got a little bit of experience in this space.
Excellent. It's going to be a great conversation. And with that, I'm going to actually go ahead and jump in and get started. As we think about the approach that organizations take for their mergers and acquisitions, there's a lot of different approaches. We've seen everything from integrating into existing organizational structures, processes, and systems to looking for best practices across the 2 organizations and really going through a harmonization exercise. Some are just adding roles and structures, so really just doing that acquisition and bolting them onto your existing structure. Let's start with you, Kathy. Can you tell me a little bit about what your approach for M&A has been at Cognizant?
Sure. Thanks, Danielle. In general, Cognizant designs our acquisitions around what we call deal archetypes. And there are several different types. And it really starts with, why are we doing this deal? And what does good look like? And then there's a couple of different approaches that we start with. And each deal is actually very unique, as most of you know. But we do start with a point of view, and that is one approach is to fully integrate, which means all of the acquired entities' employees are fully integrated into Cognizant's systems, such as payroll and benefits. These are usually lengthier and more complicated integrations. So in other cases, we choose to do what we call incubate, where there are a few changes operationally. But what we do is we set up a set of governance and controls, and we facilitate the connections between Cognizant and an acquired entity. So that enables that acquired entity to continue to grow and also remain connected to Cognizant. And yet in another case, we do what's called a tuck-in. So we had a recent situation where we had acquired a company and then did what we called a tuck-in of a smaller company into that recently acquired company. So it's acquired entity within an acquired entity. So while every deal is completely unique and you need to continue to have flexibility to make sure that you're meeting the needs of that goal of the deal, we do start with 3 different archetypes to help structure the approach. and then we flex to whatever the unique needs of that particular deal are.
Thanks. Very familiar with the incubation approach that you guys are taking. Paul, as you mentioned, you guys have been through a lot of mergers and acquisitions over the years. What has been the approach that you've taken in your activities?
We've taken a different approach each time, I think. So again, that's where we've got quite a bit of experience here. So we've been, when we started the first operating company that we brought into our Workday environment, we really allowed them to kind of set up and configure and drive how they wanted the Workday business processes to operate for their specific company. From there, we've kind of had a variety. We did a little bit of a hybrid where we tried to have an operating company shift some of their processes to align with one of the other companies that was already set up. We've also done a couple flavors of what we referred to as a lift and shift type approach, where they were already set up in a Workday tenant of their own, and we needed to just kind of lift their configurations and bring them over into our instance. And then our last one, most recently, we took resources from across 5 different companies, and we formed and created a new operating company out of that and set them up in that manner.
Excellent. Mary Ellen, I know that as Collaborative has helped over 50 customers with their merger and acquisition activity over the last couple of years. Any thoughts on what we've seen really happening in that space?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I believe I could probably think off the top of my head about customers that we've supported going through each of those models that Paul described. In general, we do follow kind of that same differentiation that Kathy talked about, though. We talk about projects that customers want to undertake that are full integration projects. We talk about some that are more of the tuck-in nature, where it's really just a very rapid hire. And I think the thing that we see most often is that you can be successful in any one of those types of projects. What's key is making sure that the approach you're taking from a systems perspective is aligned to those goals that you set out with when you said, here's what we're trying to accomplish through this acquisition, that the business goals and the system goals are aligned. Then any of those types can really be successful because you know what you're trying to get out of it.
Excellent. I think that as we know that there's a multitude of ways that we can approach this, I think next I'd kind of like to talk about the challenges we see. And Paul, based on the numerous, Workday activities that you've gone through over the last couple of years with your, different operating units, what have been some of the biggest challenges you've had with integrating systems as part of your M&A activities?
Yeah, thanks. Typically in our situations, from an HR systems perspective and doing that Workday implementation, pretty minimal input that we have to the timelines. Timelines seem to be set by the larger merger and acquisition enterprise team that's going through that, and those deals have typically been set and established, and so we need to kind of then do what we can to conform and fall into line with what that timeline is, knowing that obviously generally payroll is one of the key items that we need to get up and running as quickly as possible. The other thing, the challenge that we face regularly is all the other projects that you have going on in your standard operating company. As you're trying to bring in a new operating company to that tenant, how do you keep those other projects? How do you keep your standard day-to-day Workday activities? How do you keep all of that going? Which leads me to then, the last thing I'd add is just tenant management and keeping your configuration straight, and how do you, choosing and determining where do you merge your configurations within Workday so that you're not missing anything when it does come time to actually roll out and move into production.
Well, a lot of things to consider as you're going through these activities. And Kathy, I know that Cognizant's just beginning their journey, but obviously as a global organization, you have a lot of systems to take into consideration. What have been some of the challenges you guys have seen as you've been going through your mergers and acquisition activities?
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. Similar to what Paul just stated, access to systems is, really important. We're operating right now in a legacy system for HR system, and we've had to develop some interim processes that basically provide access before we have a full integration. And so that's challenging, right? Because, and we're very, very much looking forward to and actually undergoing a full core system modernization. And we'll look forward to, having a positive user experience And actually, a lot of the companies that we're acquiring digital talent that are used to a consumer grade interface. And we're absolutely thrilled to have announced that we will be moving to Workday. So we are on that journey with Collaborative. And until then, we've had to really come up with some workarounds, I'll say, and interim processes, really to provide the access to systems before integration.
Mary Ellen, similar as before, obviously, with our breadth of experience, I would imagine that, probably similar things that you heard from Paul and Kathy, but what else have we seen really with some of the challenges of integrating systems as part of mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how for all the variation in organizations out there, a lot of problems are always going to be systemic project management kind of problems. And the thing that I just heard from both Paul and Kathy is timeline, expectation, communication, those areas. Those are always such big project issues in the first place. And because you often don't have input to the timeline, that means you're probably having to make some trade-offs around what do you need from speed? What are you willing to give up on experience? How much can you go on the experience front to try and leverage some of those things that you'd really like to do as part of the integration, but you might just not have the timeline for? And that comes back to the expectation management with, from a consultant side, with your customer peers, but on the customer side, especially with your stakeholders. There are always people who are very interested in your timeline and want to understand not just the decisions you're making, but why you're making them. So what it is out there that you're trading off. And in Kathy's example, where you've got a lot of systems going on that you're trying to balance in the beginning, what that means in terms of user experience. They can do this in these systems. It'll be now before we can do this in another system. So there are challenges if we don't think about them in advance, but they're really great opportunities to say, whatever the reality is of the integration we're facing, we can come up with a plan to be able to communicate out well to our stakeholders and make it be successful. But it does come down to that expectation management.
I was going to say, it sounds like a lot of change management that can be very useful as you're going through these kind of transitions. So, but as we think about that, I actually want us to take a break. I want us to hear from the audience. Everyone should be about to see a question pop up on your screen. So similar to the Menti we did previously, what keeps you up at night thinking about M&A? And so I'm looking here, and we seem to have the most thing that is keeping people up at night is integrating processes, policies, and technologies. We also have change management, which I mentioned, a change in company culture, impacts to roles and structures, and then other things that might be popping up. So take a moment and go to Menti and let us know what's really keeping you up at night as you think about going through these activities. I see culture and change management kind of neck and neck here. Oh, there we go. Oh, impacts to roles or structures is coming in hot on change management. There we go. I think it's interesting to see these second, third, and fourths kind of, moving in and out of each other, because it really aligns to, these are three things that's so integrally tied to each other, right? We think about the impacts to roles or structures. Kathy, I think this kind of relates to your, different archetypes, whether or not you're going to be a tuck-in or you're going to be an incubated, right? That really starts to impact how you think of yourself as an organization, which then drives your culture and your thoughts about culture. And all of that can really be impacted positively, right, by having a good change management approach. No movement on that first one, though, integrating processes, policies, and technologies. Probably shouldn't find that surprising since all of you joined us here today. So I'll give it just another minute. Looking pretty stable. All right, so it looks like we're with integrating processes, policies, and technologies as being the number one thing keeping people up at night. Like I said, not surprising since you joined us here today, but I again think it's very interesting. We ended up with change in company culture, obviously being a huge concern. Change management, which can really help drive that culture conversation. But right behind it all is really those impacts to roles or structures. So thanks everyone for responding to the Menti. And I think that what that does is give us a nice layup to our next set of questions, actually. We know that oftentimes a merger and acquisition provides us an opportunity to improve on what we already do. Whether that's improving how we staff projects, how we sell to the market, how we deliver products, right? So improvements across the areas of people, process, technology, organizational structure, kind of that's a result of M&A. So I'm going to start with you, Kathy. What has been some of the biggest improvement opportunities that you've seen as a result of the M&A activity at Cognizant?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say in Cognizant's case, we are a people business, right? So a primary driver for our acquisitions are really acquiring highly skilled employees that sit in the center of our transformation and our digital priorities. And so we are looking for acquired companies that have critical talents that are in the areas that the company is growing in. And so, when we look at our M&A strategy and the opportunities, we want to make sure that the people that the employees that are in the acquired companies are genuinely excited about joining us and they see the potential for themselves. One of the things that I'll say is our digital business and technology area has grown significantly through acquisition, and it really is improving our ability to support our largest clients in the areas that they have the highest demand in. So for example, digital engineers are in high demand. They have very specialized skills and certifications. And so the colleagues that have joined us through acquisition, they sit squarely in the center of our ongoing transformation.
And I think that's a great thing to talk about. You guys are really talking about the people side of the business and the level of skill and that really digital focus that you have. And I think that's where that consumer grade experience that you're striving for as part of your transformation is really going to come in important, because those are the kinds of resources who are expecting, top-notch technology to support them, in their workplace. So
exactly.
Definitely see all of it being connected. Paul, again, you sitting at the middle of all of these, activities over the last several years, of different types, as you've described, what have been some of the opportunities for improvement that you guys have actually seen realized as a result of your mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah, bringing all of our operating companies onto a common HCM platform, human capital management platform, has just given a great sense of visibility into, not only our data that we have, but then it's, kind of building on what Kathy was saying about talent. It is promoting talent being able and having that ability to move throughout our enterprise and move interchangeably between the 6 operating companies. So from an employee experience, it's fantastic. Right at your fingertips, you can go and look at job openings at any one of our companies, and you're going into a common repository, a common system to identify all of that. And then I'd say, selfishly, as the leader of the HR systems team, going through all of these implementations, we've just gained such a level of in-depth knowledge within Workday and its capabilities. It's really strengthened our team and helped us grow and expand in what our capabilities are.
That's great. I think that, it's so nice, especially, I think you had mentioned earlier, acquiring other companies that had previously existed on Workday, right? You really get to capitalize on the skills and strengths that those other organizations and their team members bring to bear as what the new environment looks like. So that's awesome to hear. Mary Ellen, anything else that we've seen as we've been supporting, our customers over the last years in their activities?
Yeah, I think Paul's points about the transparency and the visibility are all, key. Everybody wants that. That's, if you come down to the main driver, that is probably the biggest driver for organizations in trying to do the systems part of the acquisition in the first place. Otherwise, we could live along in the messy for a while in separate systems, and there would be less urge to make sure that we all have one common system, because it is about the reporting first and foremost for a lot of organizations. But I think One of the things that we have really found with a lot of organizations is that while we're here kind of mentality. And let me explain that for a second. So we have a lot of customers who have been live on Workday for a number of years, right? And they may or may not have kept up with their updates, and they sort of understand what their Workday world is for good and for bad. But when you have the opportunity to bring in a new part of the organization and fresh eyes are on this, and there is a good bit of attention being paid to it, a lot of customers find that that's a great opportunity to say, well, you know, there are things that we would have liked to have done better. They were okay for now. But while we're here, while we have this opportunity, if our timeline allows us to do something that is a real integration kind of project, let's open up the business processes. Let's look at our security model. Let's talk about where we have things that we would like to be doing better to deliver stronger value to our stakeholders, because now is our opportunity, right? There's a budget for it. There's a mandate that this effort happen. Let's try and really get the most value out of that opportunity that we can. And what always kind of my heart goes out to those organizations that want to do that, but they have a timeline to do this, right? And so we also have a lot of customers that we help through that idea of what's good enough for now, back to that expectation setting. Can we talk about roadmap? These are all the things that you'd like to do. We could go in, we can assess the tenant, we can come up with the big list of what doing Workday really well looks like. And if you only have timeline to do this much of it, it goes back to the prioritization and the expectation setting, why we're going to do the first things first, but then what the long-term game plan is. Because in bringing in this new set of ideas from a new organization, you might have the opportunity to really transform some key areas in the way you're delivering value out of Workday. So I always am very happy for those organizations that have the opportunity to do that. But if you're in a situation where you don't forget that roadmaps are your friend, right? The ideas can still come when the ideas come, and you find a way to prioritize them. Oh, and I love Paul's attitude that M&A is not something we have to get through. It's something we can grow from. But the organizations that come into it with that, okay, let's see what we can learn from this attitude, really go a long way in improving their overall value.
I think, Mary Ellen, you said a couple of key things. I especially love the concept of that roadmap and really thinking about, prioritizing what can be a part of your acquisition activity, right? Versus what can be maybe an optimization activity. And I'm going to diverge a little bit from our questions earlier in that, you and I have also worked on a lot of projects where there's been a divestiture. So the opposite side of the spectrum, right? I think we've even had quite a few of those where the divestiture happened in the middle of an implementation, for example, right, which poses its own unique set of challenges. Anything different that you would say about divestiture as opposed to the merger and acquisition? I know we're focusing obviously on bringing companies together, but I think some of those lessons learned are very similar, but there's also some nuances that maybe you could talk to us about for a minute.
There are. So we do support customers through divestitures. And there's almost as much variation in how to handle divestitures as there are in how to handle the acquisitions. Just even at a very basic level, is it a very quick separation, or are you providing some kind of transition service agreement for that organization for a while? That might involve some significant restructuring inside your tenant that you weren't thinking about. If you're going to continue with this population that you have divested, but you have to continue to service for a period of time. So we have had cases where we've had to look at how to support customers through transition service agreements. There's also the question of, how do I do this most quickly? If we're divesting, how can I just let them go? And there are approaches called clone and go that Workday supports that give you the opportunity to spin off those organizations. And when we do that, we like to have a lot of good conversations with our customers about the pros and cons to that, both for the organization that is doing the divestiture and the organization that's being divested. Certainly there's a time and a place for it, but it's not every time and every place. So we like to work with customers to make sure that they understand pros and cons, what both organizations are leaving with when they walk away from the separation, and so that they can make the best plan for going forward.
I think that's, such an important thing for, I hope, everybody to take away today, is that there's no one size fits all approach to any of these, right? I know everybody wants to know what's best practice, what's best in class approach for everything. And I think, we can tell you that, but it really takes getting to know what the objective of the activity really is. And I know, Paul, you and Kathy both talked about, really understanding what the goals and objectives of the activity is to really help define what the approach is. So, not to steal anyone's thunder, but kind of think about, what are some of the top 3 factors you believe are really important to the success of your M&A programs? And I'll start with you again, Kathy.
Thanks, Danielle. And you said it right. There are many factors that go into, contributing to the success of a deal. Probably the most important one is to be really clear and crisp and be able to articulate what is the business objective of that deal? How does it fit into your overall M&A strategy? And having a view of what good looks like and what's going to become the North Star essentially really helps define a framework that you'll be able to make decisions on. And so, as you move through the deal and different things come up, having a framework and having an idea of what are you aiming to achieve really will enable decision making to be efficient, to be fair, and then ultimately support the deal objectives. From a practical point of view, there's a few other things I'd point out. And one is we have a really strong PMO and project management framework. It's defined and and there's a methodology, but it's also flexible. And so I think it's that combination of having a strong approach, yet being flexible is really critical, because there will be things that will come up that are unique to that particular deal. And having too rigid of an approach would probably get in the way rather than facilitate the actual deal itself. And not everything fits into a nice, neat mold. We talked about this earlier, that people are really important, right? So the retention of talent and keeping talent front and center, particularly for Cognizant as a people business, but that's true of any acquisition in any industry, I think, is that, we're acquiring companies that have people, right? And so it's having a good view of what does a career path look like? What are the leadership opportunities? One of the things that people are pretty excited about is all the learning and development that Cognizant offers. And as a big, broad company, we have a pretty amazing academy. Having developing a shared vision, buddy programs. Another key factor would be, organizational change management. So I was interested to see how that came in as, in the mentee as a top worry. And there's no, one perfect approach, but I do think during COVID, we've had to become a lot more creative, because typically teams would be traveling out and working with acquired entities in person. And so, like everything, we've had to get creative about how we facilitate those conversations and make sure that there is a clear understanding of what's on people's minds and address them. And really ultimately just, keeping in mind that we want to have a positive employee experience coming out of this. And so that includes, a lot of communications, but also planning and training sessions on things that are as simple as learning how to enroll in benefits in a new company, managing timekeeping, different grants of authority. And so, but again, I'll just come back to the very most important factor is just a clarity and focus on the deal objectives, and being open about that will really help contribute to the success of any deal.
Thanks, Kathy. Paul, what are kind of your top 3 factors that you believe are successful in your M&A activities?
I think my top item would be is that I'd want to work with Kathy's enterprise M&A team, because she's hitting on a lot of the key success factors there, right? Again, we've talked quite a bit about, the element of project management and the element that leadership has into this. So, my number one thing would be having that clear direction, that North Star that Kathy mentioned from the leadership team, from the enterprise M&A team of, what are some of those key objectives? Is it your timeline that you're trying to hit? Is that the overall number one objective? Or are we closely watching the cost, the dollar spend that we have, or what's the scope of it? So it's kind of balancing between those 3 items. As I think then, key success factors in actually completing and doing the M&A, the Workday piece of that M&A, is really going through and having an element of an assessment of who from that operating company or who from that acquired company is going to be part of your Workday team as you go through this implementation. And how dedicated are they going to be able to, is that organization going to be able to dedicate those resources? Or do they have their day job that's going to continually pull them, away from a successful Workday implementation? So going through that, assessing who your team's going to be, making sure that they can be involved, and then, making sure that it's the right resources that understand the processes that need to be translated into a Workday business process. They need to one, have defined processes, and two, and be the resources that actively, work and are familiar with those, so that they can articulate it to the configuration team as they're building it for them.
Thanks, Paul. I guess, Mary Ellen, they seem to hit a lot of it. I'm wondering if there's anything else left to add on top of those two.
I know there really isn't, but I'm going to talk anyway. The thing that jumped out to me listening to both Kathy and Paul is it's about knowing who your players are. I think I heard it in both of your answers. Understanding for your team members what their background is, what their availability is. Not everybody is coming into both sides of a merger and acquisition situation with the same kind of background. One of you may be a stronger technical team. You may have getting the right people in the room. Right, I heard that out of Paul's response, knowing who the right decision makers are, what their background is, what their scope of knowledge is, what they're empowered to be able to decide upon, are all really big pieces of getting the project to pull off successfully. But I think there's also that point of view knowledge about your players also, right? So when Kathy talks about doing an integration versus an incubation, right? Being upfront with what the point of view is going into that acquisition is key, because you can't have a miscommunication on that, right? If one party thinks that you are going to be kind of doing things your way within the broader structure, and the other party thinks we're all coming together into a new structure, you are never going to align on those key decisions that you need to make from a systems perspective. So making sure that you are out there and transparent with what the point of view is on how the project is going to be approached, I think is really key. And even down to the idea of having a framework for your PMO, but having some strong flexibility built into that PMO is really important. Maybe one organization is used to having a lot of structure and one is used to having much less structure. And we have to come to a point where those two organizations can effectively work together. So I heard things in both of those that if I were going to have answered first, I would have loved to have thought of to have said to myself.
I think you and I both have been in the environments where we've had to approach it as defined but flexible, right? And I think that is definitely a key takeaway here. When we think specifically, and I'm actually going to start the next one with you, Mary Ellen. When we think about specifically why Workday as a product, as a system of record, as the center of an experience platform, right? Why is moving to Workday beneficial when you are an organization that experiences M&As?
Yeah, I think the value of Workday in the M&A situation is really no different from the value of Workday in any context. It's about that value proposition that says we get more when we are on one platform. That power of one, you can't emphasize enough how much better it can be for an organizational culture to be able to reference the same tools, to talk about the same kind of performance process, to talk about the same structure and have the same language for job architecture and those kinds of things. But knowing that, and knowing that every project is not a full integration, that's the other side of the benefit of Workday, is you have so much flexibility in the configuration that there are some things that are tenant-wide decisions that once made have to apply to everybody. But there are also a lot of areas where you have the flexibility to treat some as an incubation and some as an integration, and to be able to be more responsive to the needs of your customers. And we don't find that that's true in a lot of other systems, especially as we deal with customers and we hear about why they've done something in their legacy system. It was because it was their only choice. They had to fit it this way. It wasn't really what they wanted going forward. So we see much less of that in Workday. And I think when you look at all of them combined, it comes back to that value proposition that you can leverage value for your whole expanded organization out of Workday in ways that you can't if everybody lives on their messy legacy systems.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Paul, I'm wondering if that resonates with you. Obviously, having lived it and breathed it in a variety of situations, what would you say is kind of the top reason why Workday is a great platform to have while you're going through these M&A projects?
Yeah, a lot of same things that Mary Ellen hit on. The power of one, that was a big driving decision when we made our Workday, our choice to pursue Workday, and maybe taking a little bit different angle to answer that question. The thing, one of the big benefits of just even getting onto that common HCM platform for us is, as Mary Ellen was saying, it really exposed a number of differences that we had across the operating companies, and it's really forced us to be questioning why. Why do you have to have a 5-point performance rating scale and you only have a 3-point? And so it's really driving some harmonization for us, across our enterprise, and driving those discussions of, hey, is there an opportunity to maybe centralize some of our support and our services that we provide to the enterprise? So it's really been driving that, and that's been a neat thing for us to see.
Excellent. So Kathy, you're gonna trail this one because you're just now embarking on your journey with Workday. But what are you looking forward to about moving to Workday to really help you in the future with your M&A activities?
Well, I'd have to say that I'm looking forward to a few hundred things about moving to Workday. I'll just say it. It is really for M&A specifically a couple of things. One is a lot of the companies that we are acquiring is digital talent that really expect a modern interface, right? So it's become an expectation. And so it's really going to be great for those acquired entities and those employees to feel like they're coming into a system that's modern and understandable, and it really sort of speaks for itself, right? So it's having an easier user interface, I think, is a great experience for bottom line, all 300,000 Cognizant associates, as well as all of the associates and employees coming in from acquired entities. The other piece that specifically around M&A that is something that we're really looking forward to is just the greater flexibility and the ability to integrate acquired entities faster, or that suit the deal objectives if that is to fully integrate, and being able to provide that greater flex with not such a long period of time in some cases for integration with our legacy system. So we're excited about so many things about moving to Workday, and I would sort of summarize it by saying it's really the modern interface and the ability to have self-service. And I think what I'll pick up on something Paul said, looking for Workday and the way that it's set up to help drive some of that harmonization that becomes a little easier when you have, you start with a point of view and a modern process that's been optimized. So we're excited.
Excellent. Well, we actually have a question from the audience, and it is a specific question that I'm probably going to have Paul and Mary Ellen look at responding to, but if we don't have experience with this, Ken, we will find someone to reply back to you. But Ken's telling us that his organization has a mandate to deliver email addresses, intranet, and other collaborative tools to acquired employees on day one. Workday is the gatekeeper to provisioning those tools, users' accounts, in that those systems are integrated with Workday and rely on the Workday record. Having said that, rarely is the acquisition organization ready for integration into Workday on day one, so we take the incubate road. Have any of you encountered a similar model where there is a dependency on a Workday record, but the legacy HR system remains the system of record for some time post-deal close, and how have you managed it?
I think I'll need to defer to Mary Ellen.
Okay.
we haven't encountered anything that kind of setup there, Ken. Sorry.
Yeah, so I can give you some thoughts, Ken. Again, with more time together, we could probably have a better conversation, but some things that we have seen people do, you think of it as sort of having two choices. Either you get something into Workday to feed the downstream systems, or you get the downstream systems fed by somewhere else. So we have seen some customers make modifications so that they have 2 Oktas going, for example. Situations where they are finding ways to feed into the IT side from more than one system of record. That may be an option. That may not be an option depending on your setup. And in other cases, we find that people are then doing kind of a shell record into Workday. Lots of customers will do contingents first, and depending on what you're thinking about doing for your history on the people that you bring over, that may cause some complications. So you'd want to think about it before you approach a straight on, let's treat them as contingent workers approach. So many organizations will go with an employee record that is a shell record. And then you sort of get into a negotiation game with your recipient systems to understand what kind of placeholders they can accept, how much information they truly need to have to drive the rest of their provisioning. But in most cases, it's simply a matter of, can we get the fact that the person exists, is really an employee, and we have a place to put an email address. And then beyond that, it becomes, how much more does IT truly need?
Thanks, Mary Ellen. It sounds like from the Q&A, we actually had a couple of people who are in that similar situation. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have some follow-up questions on that as well. Just a reminder, if anybody else has questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A. I think we do have one that I'm going to actually kind of start again, Paul, with you, is how do you measure success of your M&A activities?
Did we meet those set objectives from our leadership team? You know, was there a timeline mandate that we had? Was there a cost mandate that we had? So how did we achieve you know, what those core objectives were? And another thing that we look at too is, you know, how much alignment of offerings were we able to kind of negotiate and facilitate as we went through that M&A. We'll kind of continually be looking at that and seeing if we can be creating that harmonization of offerings that we have.
Kathy, what about you? How do you measure success as you're going through these M&A programs?
Yeah, I agree with Paul that it's really going back to your original, what was the reason that you did the deal, coming back to the objectives and measuring yourself against those objectives. And while there's no real single measure of success, I think there's several that come to mind, you know, so of course there's always financial measures, right? In most deals. We also look at a retention of the employees of the acquired entity over time. And then we look at engagement and satisfaction surveys. And it's really important to listen carefully to employees during the pre-close, the close, and the post-close. And then I think, you know, it's really being honest with yourself as an organization about what did you learn from this and how do you continuously improve? And I do think that particularly for Cognizant, as we've become a serial acquirer, learning from each and every one of our deals is incredibly important. And it brings us a lot of good learning that we take forward with us to the next deal.
Mary Ellen, anything else that we would say we use to measure success of our projects?
I'm just going to say, make sure you do measure success of your projects, right? That's the thing, is having something you can point backwards to say, this is what we set out to do and we accomplished it. And when you're talking systems integrations, that might be 2 sets of things. One is, did you have some system specific goals? Like while you were in there, you wanted to look for opportunities to decrease processing time on the length of time it takes your business processes to move through. Did you want to clean up your job architecture? Did you have some very system specific goals? But the other lens is remembering that the only reason you're doing the system integration in the first place is because it's in support of business objectives. Did the system contribute to meeting those business objectives in some way? Was your experience sufficient that it was able to support a quality end user experience as part of their onboarding? Was your data structure sufficient that your reporting is in good place now? So think about some of your metrics from a systems perspective and some of it from a support of the broader business objectives perspective.
Yeah, Danielle, I'd just even add on to that, you know, just Mary Ellen made me think, you know, the other thing we look at is how quick were we able to operationalize our support of that particular operating company, and how quick were they able to be up and what we deem functioning, you know, the speed of that offering.
That makes sense. I think speed, definitely goes along with that timeline conversation that we've been having throughout, and whether or not we were able to actually define the timeline or just meet the timeline, but that speed is really critical. Kathy, I think the next question is probably going to start with you based on what I see here is, when integrating two diverse companies, how do you deliver a positive onboarding experience to employees? So we'll start with you.
Sure. In our case, the acquired companies tend to be pretty small, agile, and they have a really strong culture that's really helped fuel their growth and their overall success, right? So it's really harnessing that, right? So joining a company like Cognizant of, nearly 300,000 employees is a pretty big cultural shock for most companies, right? Or all companies. And so they didn't necessarily choose Cognizant as their employer, right? So it's really bringing out the benefits to associates for them to help, them understand, the benefits of becoming part of a big, more complex, but more global organization, and all the benefits from a business perspective, right? So it's bringing together, the employees of those acquired entities into the teams that most similar, right? So that there is a sense of community, which I think is really important, particularly when you're coming into a large scale company. In some cases, branding will differ. I think communications are always critical in all cases, and keeping those lines of communication open. And also really focusing on, and being honest about, why is this important to the company? And in our case, the acquired companies are really core to our strategy, right? To digitally transform. And so making sure that they understand that, and also being open, as big of a company as we are and successful, it's really being open to learning from these new companies and what has fueled their success. And so I think it's some joint learning from each other. And communications, I think, is always important. I think onboarding with leadership is really important, and having the employees feel like they're part of a team and part of the overall fabric over time of Cognizant is also really important.
Excellent. Paul, from your perspective, anything different, or what about you when integrating diverse companies? I know you've had several different experiences over the years.
Yeah, not different, but just, kind of building on some previous comments that we had. And Kathy touched again on culture and understanding the value of that culture, and assessing that culture, so that as you get ready to, again, transition them over into Workday, going through your organizational change management process, that you're developing and tailoring that change management plan to that culture, and focusing in on there. The other thing I think that helps us to have, successful onboarding is making sure, again, doing that roles and responsibility, understanding who that back office Workday support team is going to be at each of those operating companies, and engaging them in the process, and having them to be, again, part of that implementation, and very clear of what their role is going to be post implementation moving forward.
Mary Ellen, have we seen anybody approach anything differently in our years of experience of doing this, or is this all pretty familiar and consistent with what we've been experiencing?
I think it lines up with a lot of what we've been experiencing. Paul said something there that made me want to think about coming back to the idea of knowing your players. Something to think about is not to make assumptions around the ease of that onboarding experience. Specifically, if the acquired company was on Workday and you're coming into Workday, it's easy the first time you've gone through that experience to say, well, Workday to Workday, it's the same thing. It should be very similar. And it actually is in a lot of ways more challenging. For starters, getting Workday out of data takes a little bit different approach. Getting data out of Workday takes a little bit different approach than getting data out of some other systems. So you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who is good at extracting that data from Workday. But there's also an unlearning curve that goes with going from Workday to Workday. So if I'm an employee and all I use Workday for is to update my name and to put in my timesheet, I may not experience a huge change going into the new Workday. Maybe there's some different rules, maybe there's some different labels, the branding's different, but my learning curve is going to be much smaller than that HR business partner who understood the rules, the process, the data, how their organizations were configured. They knew Workday. And especially if they only knew one instance of Workday, because that's how it's always been the one place they worked since Workday was put in. And they're told that they're going to Workday and they're presented with something that doesn't look, feel, behave in any way like they're used to Workday doing. That can be really unnerving for people and is definitely a change management area that needs some good focus and dovetails to Paul's thoughts about making sure you know who's doing what, the service delivery model, what the roles are, the responsibilities, because it is a much bigger learning curve to unlearn and learn Workday new than to learn Workday new the first time. So not something to be underestimated.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. I think that that's a really important point and kind of speaks to the flexibility of Workday, right? There is no one size fits all approach for Workday implementations, much less, Workday activity in a merger and acquisition environment. So it definitely shows that, that experience is going to be different across everybody. I think we kind of addressed some of this last question, which is really, I'll close on this just in case anybody has anything to add, but, I heard a lot about the role of culture, right? That culture is important. Thinking about culture, and how that affects, across the organizations, probably within an organization. We all like to say a company has one and one only culture, but we know that there's, usually unique cultures within, any closing thoughts on the role of culture in your M&A programs and integration strategies? And I'll start with you, Kathy.
Thanks, Danielle. I think, we have touched on a couple of these points, but, just to accentuate maybe a couple points, and that is, trying to find out from the acquired entity, what are the aspects of that culture that's made it successful, and, do our best job to maintain that, right? And that it's essential to the success of the company and try to maintain that. And at the same time, helping to identify where there may be material differences in the culture, and figure out ways to, sort of help that company overcome some of those changes that could be pretty significant in some cases. I think that, this starts with, a pretty extensive pre-close discovery process, right? To just focus on what are those cultural aspects, doing some leadership interviews, and also just engaging with employees, right, to understand and validate what we've learned. And then we focus on a group of different attributes, including, decision making and customer orientation and how do we go to the market and those kinds of things. And then figure out, we come out with a point of view, right? And it really helps to inform the overall integration strategy going forward in the change management plan.
Okay. Paul, anything to add on the role of culture?
No, I really like how Kathy, what I was hearing out of that is don't be afraid to take a deeper dive in and really get into understanding and work hard to understand what the culture is. And, from my perspective, from more of a systems is, really understand what are they experienced in doing system implementations, the support team that you're going to be working with. Have they, we ran into an instance where they had never done an actual system implementation and we missed that through our culture assessment, and or what is their support model for their HCM tool been, so that you need to have that understanding, because that's really where it's going to tailor what your efforts need to be.
Mary Ellen?
I think the approach I'm going to take on this answer is not to forget how valuable Workday can be to you as a tool of culture. So if you have culture goals for who you are as you're coming together as a new organization, look for those opportunities as you're opening up business processes, as you're changing in tenant help, those kinds of things, to use the voice of the new organization and to steer that interaction opportunity that you have with your users in the system to the kind of cultural framework that you're aiming for.
Well, I think that's a great way to end up the questions that we've received. I'm keeping an eye on time, so I'm going to go ahead and finish up real quick. Just a reminder, this session was recorded and it will be shared with all of you via email at the end of the event. Please, if you don't mind, complete a survey at the end of the webinar. And if you'd like to participate in our Meet with an Expert program, and meet with a Workday expert on any of these topics of your choosing or more, maybe dig deeper into something you've learned, please see the link in our chat to your meeting. And so with that, I want to thank everyone so very much. I think this was a great hour, and I'm so glad that you chose to spend it with us. And I look forward to hopefully engaging with you in some future webinars. So thank you.